I never thought I'd be starting over at 30. 3 years ago, my life was perfect. Or at least that's how it felt with Mike by my side. He was everything I could have wanted. Brilliant doctor by day, talented guitarist by night, and the kindest soul you could ever meet. We'd been together for 5 years, and I honestly thought we'd grow old together. Mike loved his motorcycle. I used to tease him about being a weekend warrior, trading his doctor's coat for leather jackets every chance he got. But that's what made him who he was, this perfect balance of responsibility and freedom. That morning was like any other. He kissed me goodbye, grabbed his helmet, and headed out for a quick ride before his hospital shift. He never made it to work. A car ran a red light, and just like that, my whole world collapsed. The first few months after the accident are still a blur. I threw myself into my programming work, taking on extra projects just to keep my mind occupied. My sister Sarah, despite her usual judgmental attitude, actually helped me through those initial weeks. She'd bring her boys, Tommy and Jake, over to my place, and their presence somehow made things a little more bearable. For 3 years, I lived in this strange limbo, not really dating, not really living, just existing. My programming job kept me busy, and I made good money, enough to help Sarah with her bills since she's been raising the boys alone after her divorce. Last week, his old bandmates came over. We do this sometimes, get together, share memories, laugh about the good times. Dave, their lead singer, brought out Mike's old guitar. Remember how he'd always say music was medicine for the soul? Dave asked, strumming a few chords. That's when it hit me I needed to do something permanent, something meaningful to honor Mike's memory. Not just for him, but for me, too. A way to carry him with me always, while also marking the beginning of my journey forward. I've never been the type for tattoos. Truth be told, I used to be pretty conservative about body modifications. But somehow, the idea of getting Mike immortalized on my skin, a guy with a guitar on his shoulder, felt right. It felt like the perfect tribute to the man who taught me that life was meant to be lived boldly. The tattoo parlor was nothing like I expected. I'd always imagined some dark, sketchy place with neon signs and questionable hygiene, but this was more like a high-end art studio. The artist, Anna, made me feel completely at ease as she looked at the reference photos I'd brought of Mike with his guitar. For hours later, I couldn't stop staring at my arm. The detail was incredible. Mike's profile. His familiar stance with the guitar slung over his shoulder, even that slight smile he always had when he played. It hurt like hell, but it was worth every second. 2 weeks passed, and the tattoo healed beautifully. I decided it was time to visit Sarah and the boys. It was a typical Saturday afternoon when I pulled up to Sarah's house. I wore a light jacket, with long sleeves. The moment I knocked, I heard Tommy and Jake thundering down the stairs. Aunt Tasha, Tommy practically tackled me with a hug. At 12, he still hadn't outgrown his enthusiasm for family visits. Jake, trying to maintain his cool 15-year-old demeanor, hung back but couldn't hide his smile. "Hey, Aunt Tash." Sarah appeared. Behind them, looking genuinely happy to see me. Perfect timing, I just made lunch. The house was warm, and I shrugged off my jacket without thinking. I was wearing my favorite short-sleeved t-shirt underneath, and suddenly the room went quiet. Well, briefly quiet, before Tommy's excited shout broke the silence. "No way! Is that Uncle Mike?" He rushed over to examine my arm. "That's so cool!" "Look, Jake, it's got his guitar and everything." Jake moved closer too, his teenage reserve forgotten. "That's actually really awesome, Aunt Tasha. It looks just like him." That's when Sarah's voice cut through the boys' excitement like ice. "Tasha, what were you thinking? That's just ugly. I can't believe you'd do something so permanent without consulting anyone." I felt my face flush, but I kept my voice steady. "Sarah, I didn't need to consult anyone. It's my body, and I'll decide what to do with it." The look she gave me could have frozen hell over, but she didn't say anything else. We sat down to lunch, and while the boys kept asking questions about the tattoo and sharing their favorite memories of Mike, Sarah sat there radiating disapproval. Every time I caught her eye, she was staring at my arm like it had personally offended her. I tried to keep the conversation light, telling the boys about Mike's first disastrous attempt at teaching me guitar, and how he'd eventually given up and said I should stick to coding. They laughed, but Sarah just pushed her food around her plate. It was around 8 when my phone rang. Mom's name flashed on the screen, and I knew immediately what was coming. Sarah must have texted her the moment I'd taken off my jacket. "Tasha," Mom's voice was that special mix of disappointment and judgment she'd perfected over the years. "Your sister just told me about what you've done to yourself. I have to say, I don't approve at all." "What were you thinking?" I took a deep breath. "Mom, I'm 30 years old. I don't need your approval for decisions about my own body." She made that little snorting sound she always makes when she's really annoyed. Then, without another word, she hung up. The weeks after the tattoo reveal flew by in a blur of code and deadlines. I was leading a major project for a new client, which meant endless hours in front of my computer at home. It was almost a relief to have an excuse not to visit Sarah and deal with more drama about my tattoo. But eventually, the project reached a stable point, and I couldn't avoid family obligations any longer. As usual, I headed to Sarah's house on Saturday afternoon. The moment she opened the door, I knew something was wrong. Her face had that pinched look it gets when she's about to start an argument. Tommy and Jake were in the living room playing video games when I walked in. They jumped up to greet me, but Sarah cut off their enthusiasm. "Boys, go upstairs," she said in that tone that left no room for argument. "I need to have a serious conversation with your aunt." They exchanged worried looks, the kind kids get when they know something's about to go down, and trudged upstairs. The sound of their door closing echoed through the suddenly silent house. "What's going on?" I asked, genuinely confused. Sarah crossed her arms and glared at me. "Do you know what Tommy asked me yesterday? He wanted to know if he could get a tattoo when he turned 16. 16. And then Jake chimed in, saying he'd been looking up tattoo artists online. "Sarah, they're just kids. They can't get tattoos without parental consent anyway," I tried to reason with her. "And when they're adults, they'll make their own choices about their bodies just like I did." Their own choices. Sarah's voice rose an octave. "They never talked about tattoos before you showed up with that thing on your arm. This is entirely your fault." I took a deep breath. "Come on, Sarah. Tattoos are everywhere these days. Half the people at the grocery store have them. The boys probably see dozens of tattooed people every day at school. You can't seriously blame me for them being interested." "Don't you dare try to rationalize this." Sarah was practically shaking now. "You have no idea what you've started. First they'll want tattoos, then what's next? They'll start smoking because it looks cool. Then they'll start drinking, and before you know it, they'll be doing drugs." I stood there in Sarah's living room, feeling like I'd stepped into some alternate reality, where getting a tattoo was equivalent to corrupting minors. "Sarah, this is ridiculous," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've never smoked a cigarette in my life. I go to the gym 4 times a week. The wildest thing I drink is kombucha. You know all this. It doesn't matter." Sarah's face was red now. "The fact is, you've changed. And I've been thinking about this a lot." She straightened her back, like she always does when she's about to say something she thinks makes her sound authoritative. "I don't want you coming to my house anymore. You're a bad influence on my boys." I actually laughed. It was either that or cry. A bad influence? Because of a tattoo? "Sarah, do you even hear yourself right now? Don't mock me," she snapped. "I'm serious. I want you to leave, and I don't want you coming back." "This is insane," I said, grabbing my purse. "You're making a mountain out of a molehill, and you know it. Call me when you've come to your senses." I walked out of her house that day, feeling like I was in some sort of bizarre dream. How had a simple tattoo, a beautiful piece of art honoring Mike, turned into this family-destroying drama? At home, I tried to process what had happened. Sarah had always been the more traditional one between us, but this reaction seemed extreme, even for her. Still, I figured she'd calm down eventually. She had to, right? So I kept sending her the monthly utility money, like I always did. After all, her financial situation shouldn't suffer just because she was being ridiculous about my tattoo. But as days turned into weeks, something else started bothering me even more than Sarah's reaction. Tommy and Jake hadn't reached out to me at all. No texts, no calls, no silly memes they usually sent me. The boys who used to FaceTime me at least twice a week just disappeared. I tried texting them casual messages. Hey, how's that science? Project going, work, did you beat that impossible level in your game yet? But there was nothing but silence. It didn't take a genius to figure out that Sarah had probably forbidden them from contacting me. The thought of her using the kids as pawns in this ridiculous fight made my blood boil. 2 months crawled by. I threw myself into work, took on extra projects, anything to keep my mind off the situation. But as Thanksgiving approached, I couldn't ignore the family drama anymore. Usually, Mom would have called weeks ago to coordinate dishes and planning. But this year, silence. She probably just forgot, I told myself, even though Mom had never forgotten to invite me to Thanksgiving in my entire adult life. Things had been busy for everyone. So I did what I always did, bought thoughtful gifts for everyone, including Sarah and the boys. I got Tommy the new gaming console he'd been begging for, and Jake the expensive art supplies he needed for his portfolio. I even got Sarah that fancy coffee maker she'd been eyeing, but couldn't justify buying for herself. Loading up my car with the gifts, I tried to stay positive. Surely they wouldn't let a tattoo ruin Thanksgiving. This was our family's biggest holiday, the one time of year when we all came together no matter what. Even 3 years ago, right, after Mike's death, when I could barely function, I'd still made it to Thanksgiving dinner. I pulled up to my parents' house, the trunk full of carefully wrapped gifts. The familiar sight of Mom's Thanksgiving decorations, the same ceramic turkey she'd had since I was a kid, the autumn wreaths, the pumpkins on the porch made me smile. But that smile faded when I opened the front door. The scene I walked into felt wrong immediately. Sarah, Mom, Dad, and the boys were all there. But instead of the usual Thanksgiving chaos, there was this weird tension in the air. They stared at me like I was a ghost who just materialized in their living room. Tasha. Mom's voice had that sharp edge to it. What are you doing here? I stood there, arms full of gift bags, feeling increasingly stupid. What do you mean? It's Thanksgiving. I brought presents for everyone. We didn't invite you, Mom said slowly, like she was talking to a child. We thought you'd understand that meant you weren't supposed to come. The gifts suddenly felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. Understand? Understand what? Why wouldn't I be invited to Thanksgiving? Sarah stepped forward, arms crossed. That's when I noticed the boys weren't looking at me. They were staring at the floor, shoulders hunched. Because, Sarah said, we don't need you showing off that tattoo and filling my children's heads with more inappropriate ideas about acceptable behavior. I set the gifts down harder than necessary. Are you kidding me? We're still on this? It's been months. It's just a tattoo. Just a tattoo, Sarah's voice went up an octave. It's a symbol of rebellion and disrespect. Oh my God, I ran my hands through my hair in frustration. Are you all hearing yourselves? Uncle Jim has a full sleeve of tattoos. Cousin Rachel just got a massive phoenix on her back last month. Nobody said a word about those. Dad shifted uncomfortably in his armchair, but Mom jumped right in. That's different, Tasha. You should have consulted us first. You know how we feel about these things. I felt like I was losing my mind. Consulted you? I'm 30 years old. Why would I need to consult anyone about what I do with my own body? Because we're your family, Sarah shouted. Because we have values. Because actions have consequences. The only consequences here are the ones you're creating. I could feel tears of frustration building up. This tattoo means something to me. It's for Mike. It's my way of keeping him with me, of honoring his memory. That's when Sarah said it, the words that would change everything. "Oh, don't start with that again," she sneered. "I never liked him anyway. Always showing off with that stupid guitar, acting like some wannabe rock star, riding around on that death trap of a motorcycle." She let out a harsh laugh. "You know what? I'm glad he got hit by that car. Maybe now you'll finally grow up and start acting like a normal person." The room spun around me. I could barely breathe, but I managed to find my voice. "Apologize," I demanded, my words coming out in a whisper at first, then gaining strength. "Apologize right now for what you just said about Mike." Sarah lifted her chin defiantly. "I won't apologize for telling the truth. Mom, Dad, I want her out of here. She's ruining Thanksgiving." I looked at my parents, waiting for them to say something, to defend me, to scold Sarah for her cruel words about Mike. Instead, Mom stood up, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. "Tasha, I think you should go," she said quietly. I stared at them all, my father avoiding eye contact, my mother's lips pressed into a thin line, Sarah's triumphant expression, and my nephew's confused faces. Without a word, I picked up all the gift bags I'd brought and walked out. The drive to the local homeless shelter was a blur. I barely remember handing over the gifts to the surprised volunteer at the door. "These are all new," I explained mechanically. "The gaming console, the art supplies, the coffee maker, everything's unopened." Back home, I sat in my dark living room, for hours thinking about everything. The monthly utility payments I'd been making for Sarah since her divorce. The Christmas traditions we'd started, last year's trip to Hawaii, still fresh in my memory. Tommy's excitement when he saw the ocean for the first time, Jake's endless photos of the sunset, Sarah actually relaxing for once. I'd already booked the Europe trip for this year, planning to surprise them with it on Christmas morning. But it wasn't just the trips. There were the regular shopping sprees for the boys' school clothes, the extra tutoring I paid for when Jake struggled with math, the summer camp fees, the monthly utility bills that mysteriously got paid even when Sarah was between jobs, and the college funds, 2 years of careful saving, making sure my nephews would have options when they graduated high school. I thought about Mike then, about what he would say if he could see all this. He'd probably make some joke about karma, then get serious, and remind me that love shouldn't be a one-way street. Opening my laptop, I felt strangely calm. The email to Sarah practically wrote itself. "Sarah, I've had time to think about what happened today, and I've made some decisions that I want to communicate clearly. I will no longer be sending monthly payments for your utilities. Since you feel I'm such a negative influence, I'm sure you wouldn't want to rely on my money. The Europe trip I planned for Christmas is canceled, at least for you and the boys. I'll be going alone. For the past 2 years, I've been setting aside money for Tommy and Jake's college education. Given your concern about my influence on them, I'll be closing these accounts and investing the money elsewhere. I hope you'll explain to the boys why they won't be getting their Christmas surprises this year. Feel free to tell them it's because their aunt's tattoo makes her an unfit influence on their lives. Tasha." I hit send and immediately turned off my phone. My hands were shaking, but my mind was clear. For the first time since Mike died, I felt like I was standing up for myself, really standing up for myself. The next morning, I stared at my phone for a long moment before turning it on. The notifications started flooding in immediately. 37 missed calls, 63 text messages, 22 voicemails. The first message I opened was from Sarah. "How dare you do this? To my children. You have no right to punish them because you're mad at me. Call me back immediately." Then came Mom's texts. "Tasha, this is completely selfish behavior. We raised you better than this. You're letting a tattoo destroy this family." Dad's message was shorter but equally guilt-laden. "Your sister needs that money. Think about the boys." I scrolled through message after message, each one demanding responses, explanations, apologies. But none of them, not a single one, acknowledged Sarah's cruel words about Mike or apologized for how they'd treated me at Thanksgiving. Around 2 in the afternoon, aggressive knocking startled me from my work. I'd been trying to lose myself in coding, but the sound of Sarah's voice through the door shattered my concentration. "Tasha, open this door right now," Sarah's voice carried through the apartment. "We need to have a serious conversation. I heard Mom chiming in, sweetheart, please. Let's talk about this like adults. I don't want to talk to any of you," I called back, my voice steadier than I felt. "Please leave." "You're being malicious." Sarah's voice cracked with tears. "You're being vindictive. Think about Tommy and Jake." Instead of responding, I put on my noise-canceling headphones and retreated to my home office, leaving them to their dramatics in the hallway. Eventually, their voices faded away. The next 2 weeks were like psychological warfare. Every day brought new attempts to break down my resolve. My phone became a battlefield of guilt trips and manipulation. Aunt Linda called, "Honey, family is everything. You can't throw it away over something so silly." Cousin Mark texted, "Come on, Tash, just apologize and make this right. Family has to stick together." Uncle Peter tried next. "Your mother is beside herself. Is this really worth destroying your family over?" Each time family was mentioned, I hit the end call button or deleted the message. None of them seemed to understand or care that I wasn't the one who had destroyed anything. I wasn't the one who had banned family members over body art. I wasn't the one who had mocked a dead man's memory. As Christmas approached, the tension ratcheted up. Every day brought new attempts at contact, each more desperate than the last. But Sarah took it to a new level when she ambushed me outside my apartment building one morning. "Tasha, please. We need to talk," she called out, hurrying toward me through the light December snow. I'd been thinking about what I said, about Mike. I shouldn't have said those things. "I'm sorry." I stopped, adjusting my work bag on my shoulder. The words I'd wanted to hear for weeks now sounded hollow, especially given the timing. "Are you actually sorry, Sarah? Or are you sorry that I'm not paying your bills anymore? Sorry that the Europe trip is off? Sorry that the boys' college funds are gone?" Her face flushed. "That's not fair. The boys shouldn't be punished because of me." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You know what's not fair? You banned me from seeing them over a tattoo. You said you were glad their Uncle Mike died. But now that the money's gone, suddenly you want to make amends?" "The college funds," she said, her voice cracking. "You can't jest. That was for their future." "You're right, it was. But according to you, I'm a bad influence. Wouldn't that make my money bad too? We wouldn't want my corrupt tattoo money ruining your children's futures, would we?" Sarah's face turned from red to purple. "You have no right." "No right," I cut her off. "Those are your words, Sarah, your logic. If I'm such a terrible influence that I can't be around the boys, then surely my money would be just as corrupting. I'm just following your lead here." "This is different," she exploded. "This is their education. No, this is the consequence of your choices. You can't have it both ways. Either I'm a bad influence and everything associated with me is harmful, or I'm their aunt who loves them and wants to help. Pick one." I turned and walked into my building, stopping at the front desk. "Jerry," I said to the concierge who'd watched over our building for the past decade, "my sister and parents are no longer welcome here. Please don't let them up to my floor." Christmas came, and for the first time in my life I spent it alone. Well, not exactly alone. I spent it in Paris, then Rome, then Barcelona. I posted no pictures on social media, but through the family grapevine, I heard all about Sarah and my parents lamenting to anyone who would listen about their selfish daughter who abandoned her. Family over just a tattoo. But as I stood on a bridge in Venice, watching the sunset paint the canals in shades of gold and pink, I realized something. This wasn't about the tattoo anymore. Maybe it never had been. This was about control, about family dynamics that had been toxic long before I got that image of Mike inked on my arm. The day I returned from Europe, I did something I should have done 3 years ago. I made an appointment with a therapist. Dr. Martinez's office was warm and inviting, nothing like the sterile stereotype I'd imagined. "Tell me why you're here," she said, her voice gentle but professional. I touched my tattoo absently. "I need to work through some things. Family stuff mainly. And I need to figure out how to let go of someone I lost while still keeping his memory alive." She nodded, waiting for me to continue. I loved Mike. Still love him, I guess. But I know he wouldn't want me living in the past. He always said life was meant to be lived boldly. And for the first time since his death, I feel like I'm actually doing that. Standing up for myself, making choices for me, not just going along with what everyone else wants. Looking down at the tattoo on my arm, the image of Mike with his guitar that had somehow sparked this whole transformation, I realized something important. This wasn't just a memorial to Mike anymore. It had become a symbol of my own strength, my ability to stand up for myself, my willingness to live life on my own terms. The Mike in the tattoo seemed to smile back at me, guitar forever slung over his shoulder, eternally caught in that moment of joy doing what he loved. He'd always live in my heart. But maybe now it was time to see what other joy life had in store for me.